Lantern Rite is a time for celebration, especially when we can get a free 4-star character from Liyue. You can pick any free 4-star character from Beidou, Chongyun, Ninguang, Xiangling, Xinyan, Xingqiu, Yanfei, Yun Jin, Yaoyao, Gaming, and Lan Yan. But with only being able to choose 1 out of 11 different characters, many people are wondering which is best for them, especially if they already have a lot of these 4 stars and are considering getting constellations. That's why in this video we'll go over the value of these characters and their constellations for your account. We will first start with the characters that I would not recommend, then the characters that I would not recommend unless you're in a special situation, and then we'll go over the characters that I would recommend getting. Finally, we'll evaluate which character to choose depending on the characters you already have. I'll rank these characters and talk about the value of their constellations and when I would pick one over another. That way you can feel more confident about who to pick as your free 4-star character. But as always, if there's someone you really like, then feel free to pick them up and play them. You can make any character work, it's just that certain characters will make your account stronger and team building and progression a lot easier. But once you have some really good characters, you can play some notably weaker characters, and their weaknesses don't really seem that apparent. With that said, let's start the list with characters I would not recommend getting during Lantern Rite. First up is Xinyan. Xinyan is an attack and defense scaling pyro shield character that also focuses on physical damage. If that sounds like kind of a hot mess, it is. Xinyan is not very good on her own, and even at Constellation 6 she's not very good. If you were to read her kit, you'd probably think that she'd want to be played as a physical damage dealer, but ironically she has some anti-synergy with a lot of those physical team comps, and ends up doing a lot better as a pyro DPS with a Constellation 6 Bennett. This is a good example of a character that I would not recommend playing unless you just really like her, because you can make a good Xinyan and good Xinyan teams, but it will definitely come down to your supports. A team with C6 Bennett, Kazuha, and Frina or Shalonen might make Xinyan feel amazing, but those characters will make almost anyone feel amazing because they just do so much of the heavy lifting that it doesn't really matter who you use as your on-field damage dealer. So unless you love Xinyan, I would not recommend getting her. Next on the list of characters I would not recommend is Ninguang. Geo is unfortunately the weakest element, and Ninguang does not make it any better. She's pretty lackluster at C0, and she really wants constellations. In particular, her C2 and C6 are big power spikes, and her C3 and C5 are also quite useful, but even at C6 she's still not that great. And outside of Navia teams, she doesn't really have that many areas where she really shines. But even with Navia, everyone already has access to the free character, the Geo Traveler, that ends up working pretty well with the Gumbrella Girl. So even in one of her best use cases, she can be replaced by the Traveler, which makes it hard to recommend her, even if she would be C6. Next up is Chongyun, who was one of my favorite 4-stars when I first started, but unfortunately he's been left very far behind. Chongyun's kit seems pretty good at first, until you realize that what he brings really is not necessary. Most characters who would appreciate a cryo infusion usually have their own, like Ayaka. That being said, you can play Chongyun with Rosaria or Kaya for some pretty good results. His burst can do quite a bit of damage, but it's not worth using him just for his burst alone. His Constellation 2 is pretty unique because it gives you a 15% cooldown reduction when inside of his cryo field, but most of the time that ends up sounding much better than it actually is. A lot of teams may not be able to really use the cooldown reduction optimally, though it can be nice for some quick swap teams that don't have any character that really needs a lot of on-field time. His Constellation 6 is also pretty strong, and it makes his elemental burst feel much more like a nuke. Chongyun ends up being another character that you play simply because you like him, not because he's the best choice. But if you really like Chongyun and want to play him, try him in a quick swap reverse melt team with either Kaya or Rosaria and Bennett and Xiangling. The next character on the list is Yanfei, who's in an unfortunate spot. She's an okay on-field damage dealer, but there are better options available, and I personally find her a bit clunky to play. However, her 4th constellation gives you a shield when you use her elemental burst, and this shield is very tanky, especially when you build Yanfei with a lot of HP instead of offensive stats. The advantage of this shield is that it will not mess up your reactions like Toma's shield can. Unfortunately, there's a much better shield character that we will talk about later, so that puts Yanfei in a bit of an awkward position, because there are better choices for whether you would rather play her offensively or defensively. But then again, if you enjoy Yanfei, there's nothing wrong with letting her litigate your enemies into oblivion. The next group of characters are ones that I would not recommend outside of a few specific situations. These characters have a lot more potential, but they can be hard to use effectively, or they need very specific team setups to really be useful. First up on this list of situationally good characters is Beidou, pirate captain and Ninguang's favorite roommate. Beidou is a good character that surprisingly not too many talk about. Her skill counter is pretty fun, although not great in a lot of situations, and her burst is very good, especially in AoE situations. Not only does it bounce between enemies and cause a lot of damage, but it also gives you resistance to interruption and damage reduction. So Beidou is a character that provides good AoE damage, as well as defensive utility at C0. At C1, she provides an additional defensive utility by giving you a shield, and her C2 is her best constellation by far, because it increases the hits from her elemental burst from 3 to 5, which effectively increases her damage potential by 66%, which is massive, especially because other 4-stars need to get C6 to even get close to that amount of damage increase. Beidou's C6 is also nice because of the 15% Electro Res Shred that is valuable for not only her, but every other Electro character on the team. But Beidou also has a lot of other issues. For one, she's pretty bad in single target situations, and she also has very high energy recharge requirements, and can often be reliant on doing a perfect parry with her skill for more energy, so she is actually pretty hard to play and build. While she is a good off-field electro damage dealer, she is not at the same level as Fischl, and she often really wants Fischl in her team for the extra energy. Another potential downside is that Beidou is not a good option for the strongest thing an off-field electro character can do, which is trigger Hyper Bloom. Beidou does not work well in this role because her burst will not target the Dendro cores, but she is still great in teams that want any other electro reaction. So Beidou can be situationally very good, but I would recommend people pass on her unless they were getting her C2 or C6. The next situationally good character is Gaming, the glowy lion boy and hybrid combination of Zhao and Diluc. Gaming's damage varies tremendously, and he is super dependent on specific supports and high constellations. At C0, he's nothing special, but at C6, he gets massively better. But what's crazy is just how much of a difference C6 makes. The extra 80 crit value and larger AoE that his C6 gives him is better than all of his other constellations combined, which effectively means that he gets a bigger power boost going from C5 to C6 than he does going from C0 to C5. He's also extremely reliant on specific teammates to really shine, several of which can be very premium. In particular, he wants Bennett, especially C6 Bennett, Xianyun, Citlali, or Farina. Because of all of this, I would normally not recommend choosing Gaming, but if you want to play him, C4 makes him feel a lot better, since it makes his energy recharge requirements a lot more manageable at around 140%. But if you really want him to shine, you want him at C6. And while he's not unplayable before C6, his final constellation combined with a good team setup can make him one of the top pyro on-field damage dealers in the entire game. For those reasons, I would not consider choosing him unless you already have him at least C3, but ideally C5, and also have Bennett, Xianyun, and Citlali or Farina. That's a lot of conditions to fulfill, so that's why he's not going to be for everyone. Next on the list is Xiangling, one of the best characters in the game. So why is she on the situationally good list? Well, that's because everyone already gets one copy of Xiangling for free by beating the 3rd floor of the Spiral Abyss, so you don't need to choose her. However, Xiangling's biggest power spike and best constellation is her constellation 4. So if she's C3, it may be worth choosing her to get that C4 and extra 40% uptime on her elemental burst. Outside of that though, her other constellations don't really provide much of anything for her, and in my opinion it's not worth choosing her over someone else unless you are getting her 4th constellation. And keep in mind that you can also use the Star Glitter shop to get constellations of Xiangling outside of Lantern Rite, so that makes the value of getting her during Lantern Rite also a little bit lower unless it's her C4. Next we have Yun Jin, a defense scaling, normal attack buffing character that has some specific uses, but is otherwise pretty bad. Her normal attack buffs can be pretty significant, but the buffs last based on the number of hits and not over a set duration of time. This makes her normal attack buffs pretty bad in AoE situations because each enemy hit will reduce the buff amount and her buff gets used up way too quickly. Yun Jin's best use would be with someone like Yaoyao because she does really well with the normal attack damage buffs and is also single target focused. So you can choose Yun Jin if you love playing a single target focused normal attack character, but just know that Miss Yun's energy recharge requirements can be very high. Yun Jin doesn't do much better with constellations, but her C2 and her C6 are pretty nice buffs, however the others aren't anything astounding. Next on the list are very good characters that could make a nice addition to many of your teams and your account overall. First up, we have Lanyan. She is a very helpful character that combines many useful support roles into one package. She's a shield character, so that makes a lot of on-field damage dealers a lot more comfy to play. She's an Anemo character that can use the Viridescent artifact set for the resistance shred that helps your Pyro, Cryo, Hydro, and Electro characters deal more damage, and she's also a catalyst user, meaning that she can hold the Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers to massively buff your on-field damage dealer's attack. What's also really nice is that she doesn't need a lot of energy recharge because her shield comes from her elemental skill. Her burst is nice and it can deal some okay AoE damage and weakly pull in very light enemies, but her value as a character comes from her elemental skill and the various methods of supporting the team, not her elemental burst. Lanyan is also a great pickup because she doesn't need constellations to bring most of her value, but her constellations are nice. Her C2 in particular helps her defensive role because it allows her to regain some shield value when a character uses a normal attack. At C0 her shield is decently strong, but at C2 as long as you have a character that's dealing normal attack damage, it means that your shield effectively regains its health, making her shield and defensive support so much better. So if you don't have Lanyan, she is a nice pickup, and her C2 is also great, but after that her constellations aren't quite as valuable. The next character is Yaoyao, who came out in a previous Lantern Rite and is easily one of the best 4 stars to come out during the Sumeru era. What's really interesting about Yaoyao is that her overall power is basically the opposite of most 4 stars. And what I mean by that is that a lot of 4 stars are fairly weak at C0 but get much better at C6, but Yaoyao is really good at C0 and her constellations are nice additions but they really don't do much for her. Yaoyao is an incredibly strong healer, and nearly as good as Beidou, who is a limited 5-star character. Her elemental burst offers a lot of dendro application and team healing, and she even has some dendro application from off-field. Her off-field dendro application is not spectacular, but she is often one of the best 4-star dendro options available. Yaoyao's value does drop quite a lot if you have Nahida, but if you want to play multiple types of Dendro teams in the Abyss, then she can be a very nice addition to your account. I recommend getting Yaoyao if you don't have Nahida, but you only need a single copy of her. Her constellations are fine, but she's already so good at C0 that if you already have her, you're better off with getting another character instead. And now we come to Xingqiu, who is one of the most versatile and best characters in the game, which includes a lot of 5 stars. He provides damage reduction, resistance to interruption, modest healing, and most importantly, a lot of off-field hydro application and damage, which is why he's a staple on basically almost any team that wants a hydro character, and that's dozens of different teams. If you don't have a copy of Xingqiu, he's easily my #1 recommendation. He's very good at C0, and his constellations make him better. His C1 is pretty meh, honestly, but his C2 is his second strongest constellation after C6. One downside to choosing Xingqiu is that you can get him from the Star Glitter shop, but choosing him during Lantern Rite can free up your Star Glitter for other characters, and other important constellations like Xiangling C4, Bennett C1 and C5, and Fischl C6. All of those characters are available in the Star Glitter shop, so if you pick Xingqiu now, you might be able to get those important constellations for those other characters. Another downside is that his usefulness in teams is either extremely high, or he brings virtually nothing to the table. For example, if you play Chaska or Mualani, Xingqiu's rain swords won't proc on Chaska's charge attack, and Xingqiu's summoned rain swords can eat the pyro that Mualani needs to vape, and that is really bad. But even with these downsides, he's still one of the best characters, and I would recommend getting him if you don't have him. And this makes it the perfect time to talk about which 4-star would be best for you, and bring the most value to your account overall. First of all, if you don't have Xingqiu, just get him. His usefulness and versatility are unmatched among the other 4-stars. If you already have Xingqiu, but don't have Lanyan, I would choose her. She is also extremely versatile and brings a lot of usefulness and buffs all in one package. After that, I would consider getting Yaoyao if you don't have Nahida or Beidou. Beyond that, it's all about constellations and choosing the most powerful ones for your account. I would prioritize getting C4 Xiangling, C6 Gaming, C2 Beidou, C2 Lanyan, and C2 or C6 Xingqiu. And if I had to break down my priority list in detail, it would look like this. Number 1, get Xingqiu if you don't have him. Number 2, get Lanyan if you already have Xingqiu. Number 3, get Yaoyao if you don't have Nahida or Beidou. Number 4, if Xiangling is C3, get her C4. Number 5, if Gaming is C5, get his final constellation and make him C6. Priority number 6 would be getting Beidou if she's C1 so you can make her C2. Number 7 would be getting Lanyan C2 if you use her frequently. Number 8 would be if you already had C0, Xingqiu, Lanyan, Yaoyao, Beidou, and Xiangling. I would consider getting constellations for Xingqiu because his constellations are generally worth more overall, unless another competing character's constellations are at a specific power spike level, like getting Xiangling C4. If you already have a decent amount of characters and constellations already, I would aim for the constellations for the characters you think you'll play the most. C2 Beidou and C6 Gaming are both very good, but if you already have Yaimiko and Maoika, the value of those 4-star constellations is pretty low. And finally, if you already have C6 Xingqiu, C2 Beidou, C2 Lanyan, C6 Gaming, C0 Yaoyao, and C4 Xiangling or higher, then you win Lantern Rite, and you can just pick whoever you want to play the most. At this point, you've gotten all the most powerful available characters and their constellations from the Lantern Rite selector, so you can't go wrong with whoever you choose. And you may just want to consider choosing a niche character if they fit your playstyle. I know that was probably a lot, so if you have any further questions, especially about who would be best for you with the characters you already have or are planning to wish for, feel free to come by on Twitch and ask for help. I'll be available to answer questions for you, and all you have to do is say hi and tell me which characters you have, and I'll give you the best character recommendations for your account. You can catch me live daily on Twitch at twitch.tv/sharkheart, that's SharkH3ART, and if you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the like button and sub so you can see more guide videos and get notified about free Primo Gems and more. That'll be it for this one, everyone. Take care, I love you, stay jawsome, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.